mentioned earlier, a lot of your water comes from your wells within the city. There are other members, the same thing. So we have three member agencies that use wells. For some, it's been a little bit challenging lately because of PFAS and some other issues that they have been experiencing, particularly in Sammamish Plateau and Issaquah. And they're dealing with the issues associated with their wells at this point. The business model really was designed to in the hope that Cascade could be an instigator of regionalization of water supply. The board when Cascade was originally set up was hoping that there would be interties eventually built in the region that would allow the utilization of all the water that was available, with the hope that we would use every ounce of water available before we had to go out and build additional supplies. That is still the hope of the board, that in the long run, a regional delivery system that could include Pierce County, King County, and Snohomish County would be the best way to provide water for the region. There is ample supply of water in the region at least through 2060, if not 2100. If you were able to utilize all that water without even having to build lake taps. We have approached both Seattle and Tacoma and asked them for proposals on extending the contract that does start to drop with Seattle in 2039. We've asked them for proposals on what they would be willing to provide Cascade for future water supply. Next. This is a chart that just gives you a feel for some of the things that have occurred. If you look back to 2007, the estimates for the region by Seattle and Tacoma and Cascade and Everett, as you can tell with that green line, they assumed that water demand was going to be exceptional and was going to continue to grow at pretty stratospheric rates. The recent 2019 chart, which is in blue, shows you what the current forecasts are, which may still be slightly large when you look at supply. If you look at Seattle in 1992, since 1992, population growth for their service area has been about 35%. Total reduction in overall water use has been about 35%. So population's gone up, water use has gone down. That downward trend slash flat trend is continuing. A lot of it has been through efficiency changes, conservation, changes in standards, plumbing standards and others. All of that has led to a reduction in use. Continues to be, the challenge of use continues to be peak use, summer use, which tends to be about 1.6 to 2 times what winter use is, as people get involved in gardening and washing their vehicles and doing other things during the summer. Next. When the board took a look at the contract expiring and looked at the amount of time, lead time it would take if we didn't get a contract extension and needed to go off and start looking at building the treatment at Lake Tapps, they gave a challenge to the staff that we should approach both Seattle and Tacoma and look at trying to get at least a 20-year extension in our contract, get water beyond 2039 for at least 20 years from either Tacoma or Seattle. They wanted it to be at reasonable and predictable costs. They wanted and they wanted it to be a better financial outlook than if we had to build Lake Tapps, so that we would continue to push Lake Tapps off as long as we could if we could get an agreement in place that would be more beneficial to all of our customers. They wanted flexibility and certainty for future elected officials that would be on the board. They wanted the certainty of supply, but they wanted flexibility knowing that conditions will change. What we thought 10 or 15 or 20 years ago is not what is happening today. What is going to be happening in 10 or 15 or 20 years is not what we anticipate today will happen in the future. Whether it's climate change, whether it's per capita water use, whether it's overall demand, all of those things are going to have an impact. And so there needs to be some flexibility for future decision makers to be able to look at what options are available, to keep open the opportunity of making future decisions that are in the best interest of their customers. And they were hoping that they would also be able to start down the path of a regional partnership, which would lead to a regionalization of water supply. Next. We have gotten proposals back from Seattle and Tacoma. The Seattle proposal, they have taken a very conservative view on water supply. They were willing to provide a 10-year extension with a what I call a $14 million penalty clause that says because you've paid slightly less per unit of water than our other customers have for the last decade, we want to make that up if we're going to give you an extension. So the 2040 to 2049 extension is about an additional $14 million in additional payments that would have to be negotiated with Seattle. They then offer two potential 5-year extensions. If we wanted to get the first 5-year extension and get a guarantee, they want another $20 million for that first 5-year extension. Again, as what I would call a penalty charge to make up for what they thought that they had lost because they charged us less than the other wholesale customers. And then they said, and if I was going to, you get the 10-year is 100% guaranteed. I'd say the first 5-year option is probably about 75 to 85% guaranteed. The third year, the second 5-year option is about 70, 75, 80% guaranteed. And then they put on the table a 40-year after that, another 40-year option where there would be a 25% premium that we would pay beyond what all the other customers would pay. But they put terms and conditions on the 40-year extension that I would say the relative risk is probably about a 10% chance we'd be able to utilize that option based on the conditions they put in place. That includes building a regional transmission line. So the Seattle agreement doesn't meet a lot of the tenets that the board originally set out. And at this point, I don't think we're going to see any changes from the Seattle offer. The Tacoma offer actually is slightly different since last Friday. The 20-year guaranteed contract and the 5-year likely extension now is a 25-year guaranteed contract. They have done a lot of work and they know and are comfortable now that they could give us a 25-year extension. Their pricing is about 75% of what Seattle's pricing is. It's significantly less, but we still would be required to build a pipeline to deliver that water from the south to the north. And it would allow lake taps to be built, if it needed to be built in the future, in 2 phases. And we would need a pipeline if we ever were to use lake taps anyway, so we would be able to utilize any construction that we did for eventual lake taps water if necessary. Next slide. From a financial proposal basis, the 10-year guaranteed extension from Seattle is worth about $53 million to Cascade, because you calculate net present value of building lake taps and how long you can push it off. So it is beneficial even with the penalty fees that they built in. The 2 5-year extensions are worth about another $130 million, again, for pushing off to the future lake taps. And the 40-year extension, although not a high probability we get it, has a huge value because then you're not building lake taps till 2100. So it does have a tremendous financial benefit. The problem is the chance of getting it is not exceedingly high. The Tacoma offer at this point, the 25-year offer, is worth about $300 million, $299 million in net present value. So it allows us to have kind of moderation in rates over the next 20 years. Next slide. So you see longer certainty plus flexibility with Tacoma. It puts the board in a position and you all in a position probably in another 15 years of looking at what alternatives are available out there. Again, Seattle would be an option at that point. We would know more about what's going on. They would know more. There would be different people running the organization in Seattle. If you looked at the Tacoma proposal, they're not sure that they might have additional water also available as they look to the future. So there would be options available or like taps. So it preserves that flexibility for the board, again, to look at trying to find the best alternative for providing water to all of its customers. It also reduces the construction costs for lake taps because it allows to be done in phases, and you only have to do the first phase at a minimum amount, and you're not having to build the whole project at once. And it provides really an opportunity for regionalism and improved resiliency. If you can intertie the region, all you have to do is look at earthquake risk in the region, look at other challenges related to climate change or climate differences in the region, and any interties would allow the ability to move water around. As you well know, Seattle put a curtailment in the fall on water supply. This year, Tacoma had no curtailment on water supply. If there was an intertie between Seattle and Tacoma, the Seattle system and the Tacoma system through Cascade, we would not have had to go to curtailment in the fall like Seattle did. So there are it does provide a lot of benefits in the long run. Next slide. From a schedule, we're early in the process. We're in the March-April timeframe where I'm out talking to individual councils and commissions this month and next month. I was at Issaquah last evening with the city council here tonight, and then we'll be in front of all of the councils and commissions by the end of March. What we're looking at from the board sometime in that April timeframe, more than likely, is do they want to give us some direction to do additional negotiations with Tacoma and or Seattle for actually getting down into the nitty-gritty of a contract. If we get guidance from the board in that April timeframe, then April through September, we would be negotiating with Tacoma and or Seattle for specifics that we would then bring back to the board with a decision from the board sometime in October, November. So the very last part of 2024, we would end up making a decision. And that's about as quick as I can go through that.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Clark, for that presentation. Are there questions from the council? Councilmember, did you raise your? Oh, Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you so much for being with us tonight and visiting with all the other councils. That's quite a roadshow. I really appreciate the chance to hear a bit more about the decision ahead. Obviously, Redmond is a city that prides itself on its sustainability. And to me, the burning question I had for you coming in, you were able to answer in the chart that I clearly didn't understand the first time I saw it. But not only individual action matters, but also the way we are designing our growing populations and the places where they live and work to use less water. Wow, it's clearly making such a difference. And so we're going to be talking later tonight more about how our housing continues to grow here in the city of Redmond. And I'm just really glad we had a chance to see this reminder here too about design and whatnot. So thanks for being here. I actually don't have a question, just wanted to hold some space to say, wow, quite the decision. I'm really glad that Mayor Bernie is on the board to help inform that decision. And yeah, the city of Redmond, we care a lot about this. So
we are in the middle of taking a look at a new forecast of demand, and we're doing that because we want to be able to present that to the board over the next few months before we get much further into this. Because when you start looking at demand, you look at that curve, it drives some of the decisions you're making. Mm-hmm. And the one area where when you look at those graphs that drives everything, like I said earlier, is peak use. So as we look at the future, the more we can do to drive down peak use from what it has been historically, and it's down a lot anyway. I mean, on a peak day in the late 80s, early 90s, Seattle supplied about 320 million gallons of water in the region. Probably in the last 10 years, the highest peak days been about 210, 215, huge reduction. And the more you can continue to push on the peak, the longer it goes out without needing to build additional supply.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Council Vice President Forsyth?
Thank you. Definitely appreciate the in-depth knowledge that you provided and the insight into what we're looking at in the future, and understanding the broader picture. When we were, a lot of us were recently at a conference and communicating with a bunch of our neighboring fellow electeds, and I had learned that the city of Bothell has a water company that is bottling that was recently bought out by Nestle. We know historically that they have done some pretty detrimental things to water supply, and I'm interested if you can enlighten us on what we're doing to safeguard ourselves from similar actions within this region, within Cascade Water Alliance, and what we can do to protect ourselves from that sort of thing occurring.
Well, it's actually pretty simple. The board can just say no to any future offers for purchasing the water supply system. I mean, there are benefits of partnerships, private-public partnerships, and in fact, we use Veolia for some of the operational issues down at Lake Tapps rather than staffing for that. So, but we own the system, we own the water right, we own the supply, and we direct them on what we want them to do. That is a good public-private partnership. Selling your water supply, you lose control. And as much as you want to say you have control, you still lose control. And that's been a challenge across the country for the last 30 or 40 years, not only on the water side, but also on the wastewater side. So we are all trying to safeguard as much as we can the ability for the elected officials to be able to continue to make the policy decisions and guide how our water supply is going to be used in the future. So it's a great question, and it's something that we need to safeguard all the time.
Thank you. I really, truly appreciate that. It's definitely something that keeps me up at night. So I appreciate the work you all are doing, and that we will have those protections.
Thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Clark. It's been a pleasure serving on the Cascade Board for the past several years. And I just wanted to congratulate your staff and just say how outstanding it was to work with the group, especially on the financial side. This is some of the stuff that council doesn't get to see the details of, but one of the things I really appreciated was working with the finance staff, especially Ed Seabrun. What is a really careful process that actually has a really big impact here in the city of Redmond on our customers, our rate customers. So the process for considering the impacts to multiple cities within the region for the rate charges that will be adopted by the board before they come to the councils, and also that you're coming here to council to tell us about them before we get a chance to think about them and have those questions asked. I think that's really helpful. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that. And the other thing that we did last year that was really helpful, just to get sort of a line of sight into the nature of the city's water supply itself. We just asked simply to split out the Novelty Hill utility district area versus the downtown area, and it's going to help us understand sort of where that resource goes within the city. So I wanted to say thank you for that. Thank you for the opportunity. And my question for you is, how's snowpack looking for this year?
Not particularly good at the moment. I mean, you're probably, I haven't looked today, it's probably in the 50 or 60% range. The Seattle reservoirs, as long as they continue to operate them in a dynamic way, and historically they used to have what they called a static rule curve, which says on June 1st, this is what you ought to be, on May 1st, this is what you ought to be for reservoir levels. We changed that when I was there and went to a dynamic rule curve, which said, if you got a year where it looks like this, then let's not let it, because you're always balancing between flood pocket in those reservoirs and releases. And if it gets to a spring like this where you don't have a lot of snow and you're not going to have a big snow melt, then you can probably take a little bit more risk related to keeping less of a flood pocket in those reservoirs. And so my guess is they're going through that right now, trying to find that right balance. But it is not a particularly good snow year. It's been pretty warm lately, so.
Okay, so instead of a full fire hose of information, we'll get only 60%. Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, so, well, yeah, and the snow is really your savings account, and rain's your banking account and snow's your savings account, and it's not good when you don't have any savings. So it can be a problem as you look at that. And Ed is one of a kind related to finance stuff, and has done yeoman's job in analyzing all of this stuff. Some of the poor staff have been through, I think, 3 4 to 5 hour sessions now. We call them deep dives, which where they're sitting through and getting this in excruciating detail. But at the end of the day, we want as much transparency as possible and people to be as informed as possible when they make the decision.
Thanks. And I also wanted to acknowledge the staff support for this group is also amazing, so thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Councilmember Anderson, for your service on that board the last several years. Are there other questions from the council? Okay, then I'll make my comment or question here. We'll also say thanks for the presentation and to the previous comments, as we are seeing the impacts of climate change on our snowpack and the impacts on water supply. I know we've been seeing articles popping up in the newspaper, so the public is becoming aware. I know this last, as you were talking about a little bit around how we think about our own consumption, I know this last summer there was a call from Cascade Water Alliance to ask people to reduce their consumption of water. Can you just share more about that in terms of your strategy of engaging the public and what the public might expect going forward? Is that going to be a regular thing we'll be hearing in the summer or other times?
Yes, you are going to be hearing more as you look to the future. I think one of the issues that we're taking a look at now related to the demand forecast for the future is trying to look at, for lack of a better term, manipulating the peak use factor and looking at what the implications are of driving that peak use down, that summer use down. And it appears that it can have hundreds of millions of dollars of benefit to the ratepayers if we can figure out a way to do that, because it allows us to take the existing water supply and utilize that supply for longer and longer periods of time. So you're probably going to see a increased focus and discussion amongst the Cascade members about what kind of programs do you put in place to deal with peak water use. There are things that have been done in other places. If I knew the people down in Vegas, they did a turf buyback program that they went out and they purchased back turf so that it didn't have to be watered. There are kind of sprinkler support systems you can put in place to allow people to have their systems examined so that they're more efficient. So there are public education opportunities also, where you start early in the schools and others and are educating people on water use and the importance of water in the region for the future. So I think you're going to see a continued elevation of that discussion and some debate that will happen related to that going forward, because it does make a big difference in what supply looks like.
Yeah, and I will say, here in the city of Redmond, we have an exciting climate action challenge where people can opt in and be able to look at how they can reduce their use of various resources. So, it'd be great to be able to see partnership with the cities on that work. Mayor Bernie?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, that's part of the pleasure of being a partner with Cascade Water, be a member of the Alliance, is that we have really great opportunities for our community members to participate in. We have, Cascade has a gardening series that used to have sign up and go in person, but a good thing of the pandemic was that they all switched to online, and so now instead of a limitation of like 30 people to be part of these sessions, I think one of the last ones had like 240 or 280 people could participate online with amazing gardeners to help community members figure out differently how to use water in their gardens and their yards. We also are, we're looking at encouraging community members to just look differently at their water use in their houses, in their yards. And so there's a lot of resources that are available through Cascade, through our city's website that directs to Cascade, for community members who are starting to think that these are the months that people start thinking about gardening and what that might look like. And I would just suggest to people to use that as a resource for them. And also, we're also a sponsor of the Northwest Garden. What is it? I haven't been to it in so long.
Flower and Garden Show.
The Flower and Garden Show that's happening this weekend in Seattle, and Cascade is one of the sponsors, in part because of the really robust work we do on conservation and regional water use. So I encourage everyone to take a look at that as well. But it's really a fantastic. I want to thank Chuck as well. He's coming out of retirement to help us out. But
I've retired 5 times now.
I know it's 5 times. But they're really an amazing partnership. It allows the city of Redmond to be part of this regional water resource that benefits all of our ratepayers and will benefit all of our ratepayers into the future as well, versus relying solely on our own water supply, and our own contractability. So I'm really excited for the continuation of this partnership. So thank you all for being here tonight.
I'm also a Woodinville Water Commissioner, so I do spend a lot of time dealing with water issues.
Wonderful. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Are there other questions? All right, seeing none, we'll say thank you very much. And move on to the next item on our agenda. The next item on the agenda is groundwater protection and water quality update. Chris Stenger, Deputy Public Works Director, will introduce this item.
Good evening once again. To segue from the last presentation, we'll now be moving on to how Redmond plays a role with our amazing staff on the day-to-day pursuit of water production and water quality. So you'll get a Windows insight on what goes on every day with the staff at Redmond. I hand it over to Ernest Fix, our maintenance manager for the utility.
All right. Sorry, let me get that arranged here. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Council, for having us here this evening. So the purpose of tonight's presentation is to provide a high-level informational overview on the groundwater production and the drinking water quality system. In short, we're going to be giving you the basics on how we go from a raw natural resource into the reliable, clean drinking water that you get out of your tap. The primary focus is going to be on the water that we produce out of our aquifer. We will also touch briefly on the supply from Cascade Water Alliance, who we just heard from as well, but we'll try to eliminate the redundant information there. So we're going to walk through the water system, give a light touch on Aquifer 101 to get you familiar with our groundwater resource. And then we're going to transition over to our wells treatment system and distribution system. We have 2 subject matter experts with us this evening who will lead the presentation. You've already heard from Jessica, but I will reintroduce her. So Jessica Alexson is one of our senior environmental scientists. And then we also have Gabby Wolf, who is our water quality operations supervisor. And with that, I will turn it over to Jessica.
Great, thanks so much, Ernie. So we've talked a little bit about this, but Redmond is very fortunate that we have a hybrid water system. So basically what that means is we have 2 different sources of water. The first one is from our groundwater. We have 5 municipal wells that supply about 40% of our drinking water here in Redmond. The service area where that groundwater serves is shown on the map in the tan color there. As we heard earlier, we also receive about 60% of our water from Cascade Water Alliance. That comes from the Tolt Reservoir, and that service area is shown in that kind of bright green color on your map. And then you'll notice that in some areas it's that dark green color. We do have some parcels that still have their own private well, so they pump groundwater for themselves. The important thing about having a hybrid system is it really provides the city resiliency and flexibility, especially to respond to any emergencies such as drought or earthquakes. Through Cascade, we do participate in regional partnerships, and we have a place at the table when we're talking about regional water conservation issues. So for the remainder of this presentation, we're really going to focus on that tan area of the map and talk about our groundwater supply. So now we'll talk a little bit about the Aquifer 101, our Redmond's alluvial aquifer, and any evening where I get to use geology terms is a good evening for me, so thanks for being part of that. So alluvial basically just means any sediment deposited by a flowing body of water, so anything a river or a stream deposits. So in Redmond, our aquifer is found in the river valleys, Bear Creek, Evans Creek, and Sammamish River. An aquifer is an underground body of water. So I like to think of it as like a big rock sponge. A lot of people think groundwater is just like a river flowing underground, but it's actually water in tiny pores between like rocks and pebbles and that type of thing. So as I was saying, our aquifer is found in kind of that darker area of the map that you're seeing right now in the river valleys. In general, it flows in the directions of the arrows that you can see on the map. So kind of, down Bear Creek and Evans Creek and eventually ending up discharging into the Sammamish River. The 5 stars on the map are our 5 groundwater supply wells where we pump the groundwater from. So our aquifer is very shallow. The schematic shown on the slide shows that it's only about 5 to 15 feet from the surface to the top of the aquifer, especially in the downtown and Marymore areas. The aquifer is unconfined. Yay, another geology term. So basically that just means that there's no layer of like clay or something that's going to stop the water or any contaminants getting from the aquifer. It's just going to go straight from the surface down to the aquifer. And you'll also notice our aquifer is located in our urban setting, right? It's in downtown, it's in Marymore, it's in, kind of the industrial area of Southeast Redmond. And so just based on the land use, there's potential for contaminants to enter our aquifer. So basically all of these characteristics mean that our aquifer is vulnerable to contamination. And so because of that, the city really has a lot of protection efforts that we've put into place to make sure that our aquifer remains a safe drinking water source. We've created a critical aquifer recharge area, or CARA, and that is shown on the map you see here on the slide. The dark blue is our CARA 1. So essentially in this area, groundwater takes 5 years or less to get to one of our supply wells. The lighter blue area is CARA 2, so that area groundwater takes 10 years or less to get to our supply well, or it's an area that has a critical recharge effect on our aquifer. So water in that area won't reach our supply well, but it helps maintain the quantity that we need in the aquifer, so we're able to pump our wells. Again, because our aquifer is vulnerable, we have a lot of protection efforts that we do within the CARA. We do a lot of policy review. This past year, staff has really been tracking regulations at both the state and federal level on PFAS, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. In addition, we submitted comments to the Washington Department of Ecology about their Water Law Policy 2030, just because some of the comments or the edits that they're making to that policy potentially erode some of the flexibility that we have with our municipal water rights. We also conduct development review within the CARA. We participate in the development review process. Basically, we're looking at any development within the CARA, making sure that it doesn't adversely impact our drinking water supply. Over the past year, we've looked at about 200 different reviews through that process. We also conduct business assistant visits. Essentially what we're doing here is going to businesses within the CARA that handle hazardous waste or have some type of land use activity that could be detrimental to our aquifer. And we provide assistance with them to help them either eliminate or reduce the amount of hazards that they have on their site. And finally, we have a groundwater monitoring program where we go out and sample monitoring wells twice a year, once in the summer and once in the winter time. And the next slide is going to go into a little bit more detail about that. So this 3-dimensional map you see here shows that we have approximately 100 monitoring wells throughout our CARA. We sample a subset of these monitoring wells twice a year. We're really looking for common chemicals that you'll see, and we're also looking for emerging contaminants, the big one being PFAS. That's obviously a big issue right now. I'm sure you've heard about it in the news, but just as a reminder, it's in water-resistant clothing, it's in Teflon, it's in, food wrappers. So it's basically ubiquitous within our environment, but we are monitoring some of our wells just to keep an eye on what's happening in our aquifer. In addition to monitoring the chemistry, twice a year we also go out to all of these monitoring wells and measure the level of the groundwater. So in fact, last week was just our winter sampling event. So city staff were out at all of these wells last week, measuring the levels, just to keep track of kind of a baseline of how we're doing trend-wise over the years. And so with that, I just want to say that this monitoring well network really provides an early warning system for our supply wells so that we have an idea of what's happening in the health of our aquifer. So with that, I'm now going to turn the presentation over to Gabby, who's going to tell you how we get this groundwater out of the ground and into Redmond's homes and businesses.
Thank you, Jessica. I'll start with just a general overview of what it takes to get the water from the aquifer to our customers. It starts with pulling water out of the aquifer one bucket at a time. I'm just kidding. We use a well pump and pump the water out at varying rates at each of the sites. We treat the water with fluoride and then disinfect using chlorine. We adjust the pH because the raw water that comes out of the aquifer has a low pH, so we adjust that using aeration, no chemical addition to do that. And then the water spends a short period of time in a clear well, which is really just a basin underneath each one of the well buildings in order to get an appropriate amount of contact time with the disinfectant before it reaches the first customer in the distribution system. Not pictured on this overview are our interties with the Tolt or with Cascade, but in the tan area of the map that Jessica showed you and on the hybrid system slide, that area of our town in the peak season in the summer when we have to supplement our production, we are blending both water from Tolt and groundwater in order to meet the customer demand. I know everybody here loves tables, so we're going to go line by line. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry. There's a lot of information on this table. The primary point to get across is that there's a pretty rigorous water quality sampling schedule that we are required to adhere to. City staff take these samples in accordance with our requirements and scheduling. In 2023, we collected over 1,300 regulatory water samples out in the distribution system. And when I say those are the ones we collected, those are the ones that went to the lab. We also do a lot of monitoring in the field that doesn't require sending a sample to the lab. So this is just a bit of a snapshot of what the staff are doing from day to day. You'll see the graphic here that kind of has three different sections in the circle, and it's a way of us describing the multiple barriers that we use to protect our drinking water from outside influence. So we're talking about water. We just talked about water quality treatment, drinking water treatment. We're going to talk a little bit about the distribution system and the activities that we engage in maintaining that system, and then we'll talk a little bit about the cross connection control program as well. Some of the things in this table that might look familiar to you because they've been prevalent in the news are changes to the lead and copper rule, changes in regulations regarding PFAS, and the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule. That is called UCMR, and you may have heard of that. It's an EPA program that has purveyors across the nation are sampling for various contaminants in order to determine what the prevalence of those contaminants might be across the nation, and that informs rulemaking process and the development of drinking water standards. Staff just completed the first required sampling event for EPA's 5th iteration of UCMR, and this was concluded in November. The samples were collected at all entry points to the distribution system, and they were analyzed for 29 PFAS and lithium. There was one detection at wells 1 and 2 treatment. It was of perfluorobutane sulfonic acid, which I know everybody really loves to hear about. No, it's PFBS is the acronym for that. It will trigger a subsequent sample in the coming months. But just to put it into perspective, the detection was 3.1 parts per trillion. The state action level for that is 345 parts per trillion. So it's less than 1% of the state action level. In the water distribution system, our staff are engaging in a number of activities that help maintain the integrity of the system and also maintain the water quality. One of those ways is by supporting development. We do that by being on site anytime that there is a tie-in to an existing main, whether it's a service or a new main. Our staff operate all the valves in the system. We don't allow contractors to do that. And that's in order to make sure we are aware of what valves are being operated and ensure that they're the correct valves. It's very easy to overpressurize a part of the system if the wrong valve is open. So that's one way that we can prevent against main breaks or something like that associated with improper use of our valves. Staff also maintain our pressure reducing valve stations, and you can think of those as the gateway from one pressure zone to another pressure zone. And by maintaining those on a regular frequency, there are roughly about 100 of those. They're maintained, all the rubber goods, gaskets, and things like that are replaced in those once every 5 years at a minimum, or sooner if needed. In addition, we talked a little bit about the system isolation valves. Those are just any valve in the system that allows us to isolate a small part, any mainline valve. Staff regularly go visit each of these valves. They exercise the valves to ensure functionality, ensure that they're accessible, and to make sure that if we do find something that is in need of repair, we can make that repair ahead of an emergent need to use them. During main and service line repairs, you'll notice that even when staff are on site, you might still see water coming out of that hole or out of that break area. And that's because in order to maintain water quality, we maintain positive pressure to that break as long as possible until we're able to excavate below. And that prevents contaminants from entering into the pipe during those repair activities. Finally, we operate a cross-connection control program in compliance with the State Department of Health regulations. That program maintains an inventory of all backflow assemblies at businesses and homes throughout the city and ensures that they're tested in accordance with the law and their use. By doing that and conducting, on-site inspections and surveys, we're able to help educate the public on things that they may not be aware is a danger to them within their own building. And we can also protect the integrity of the public water system as well. In the peak season, we are producing about 3.3 million gallons per day with our wells, and we're supplementing that with an additional 5.9 million gallons per day from Cascade. Some of the ways that we can protect the quantity of water available to us during the peak season or any other time is by optimizing our maintenance schedule. We take wells offline for maintenance outside of the peak season. The peak season is between June and September. And we purposefully do that so we can maximize our production at the wells during the peak season. Staff have been working with planning, finance, fire, as well as external stakeholders to develop policy direction for dewatering regulations. In December of 2021, we received direction from the council to limit dewatering within the CARA. And interim dewatering limitations were adopted by council in September 2022, and final changes will be brought back to council, packaged with Redmond 2050 alongside planning staff in the first quarter of 2025. We're also tracking policy changes regarding PFAS and municipal water rights at the federal and state level. alongside that, we're assessing well 4, which has historically had quantity and quality issues. So we want to evaluate the options that are available to us to maximize the use of that water right at well 4. And finally, kind of to tag on to the conservation discussion, we are piloting advanced metering infrastructure, which is really just a smart water meter. We've been researching different vendors, different options, and we will be piloting some of those meters later this year. That will allow us the opportunity to read meters remotely, offer better customer service in that we can provide a quicker response if we notice that there may be a leak on the private side. And it will allow us to set alarm thresholds so we can, set whatever usage dates, times, and limits that match our conservation efforts.
All right, thanks, Gabby. And just to wrap up, we wanted to touch on a few items related to water quality and production that we will plan to bring back to council in the future. Starting off with the water system plan. This is a functional plan update that identifies water-related capital improvement projects for maintenance and to accommodate planned growth. So this has been in the works for several years and will be making its way through the council process for review in this spring. Also, as we know, 2024 year is a budget year, so we'll be working on developing budget offers for the 25-26 biennial budget, and just wanted to highlight the 2 offers that the work described here is going to fall within, with the groundwater management offer and the safe drinking water offer. Kind of along those lines, we have the water utility CIP. One thing to call out here is looking for a potential future change to include the development of a pipe replacement program with a focus on replacing some aging asbestos concrete water mains. Temporary construction dewatering regulations. Gabby just touched on that on the previous slide, but just as a reminder, looking at proposed restrictions on temporary construction dewatering within the CARA to bring back to council the first quarter of 2025. And then finally, also, Gabby mentioned this also, but the future well 4 recommendations. So staff are currently evaluating well 4 and trying to come up with recommendations that we will keep council informed on and bring those recommendations to council when we have them. And with that, I think ready for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Are there questions from the council? Councilmember Salahuddin.
Thank you for such a thorough presentation. Really appreciate all of the slides. And my question is around the water quality sampling slide and a few questions that might be related. One of them is, around that frequency of water quality sampling. Is that for each of these different samples, is that set and is it specific for each of them, like why 9 years versus 10 years? And then what is your process if you do find irregularities? And then you mentioned, 3 parts per trillion. If it's repeated and you find it again, what's the process that you would take for that sample?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first part of your question on the varying timeframes, Redmond has historically not had detections or had, they have been approved by the Department of Health for a waiver, and that's why we're on that extended period. The waiver can be taken back if we were to start to see those kinds of contaminants in our system. They would probably increase our frequency for monitoring. And then in addition, any detection that we have, it really depends on the contaminant and the level. So there are different requirements for subsequent testing, monitoring, and reporting, and they're all they're all a little bit different depending on the contaminant.
Thank you. Council Vice President Forsyth.
Thank you. Thank you. That was one of my questions as well, so I appreciate hearing the answer on that one. 2 questions. I want to follow up on that. Are we budgeting for the potential of having to increase the frequency of the testing?
Specifically for the PFAS state action levels and the monitoring that we're doing for UCMR, we did budget extra, assuming that we would have increased monitoring if we had a detection. So the plan was this year, with this budget, the plan was that we planned for having to resample every site at the maximum frequency required by Department of Health.
Okay, thank you. And then same question as earlier in the Cascade presentation about protecting our water source from outside interests. Do we currently have a policy in place? And forgive me for not knowing this one. Or is this something we need to look at so that our water can't be basically taken out from under us?
I don't believe Chris, I don't know if you have an answer to that one, but I don't believe we have a policy in place for that.
Council member, that's something that we can get back to you with the information on.
Okay, and if we do not, I would love to see us discuss that as part of 2050 or sooner, whatever works for the schedule. But I think it's very critical for us to set a policy like that in place.
Thank you. Councilmember Nueva Camina?
Excuse me. Thank you for all of the work that went into it. Being a downtown resident and, of course, seeing all the great growth that we've had, I know that whenever we put in a new building, and especially when we're then tapping into underground parking, because we do deal with such a shallow groundwater, what do we have in place that's keeping an eye on that? Like, one, like, hey, whoops, did we go too far? Two, underground parking tends to have higher temperatures. How is that impacting the groundwater, if at all? And kind of what do we have in place to keep an eye on this? Because it is such a precious resource for Redmond.
That is a great question. Thank you for asking that. As I mentioned earlier, we're part of the development review process. So when developments come in within the CARA, staff review those. And if they do temporary construction dewatering because of the depth of their parking garage, it has an extra step to that review process. The project itself has to do monitoring. They have to provide reports to show that they're not going to have a detrimental impact onto our aquifer. And so through that development review process, that's how we're really keeping an eye on that. When they're dewatering, the project is responsible for monitoring the groundwater level around the site. They're responsible for taking any water quality samples if there's a potential contaminant plume in the area. And so we have our TCD operating policy that they have to follow. And as both Gabby and Ernie mentioned, we are working towards eliminating dewatering within the CARA for underground parking. We're working through the Redmond 2050 process to work with building heights and parking ratio reductions so that we can basically move parking structures from underground to above ground.
Follow-up question for that is, once it's been done, because of course there's a lot of settling that happens from the time that we're constructing to we're now 5 years down the road, both the building and the land as well. Both are dynamic within those first few years. Do we have something that comes back around and says, hey, how really is your lowest level parking? How's that really happening? Or testing the soil around that to see if there's anything that's seeping out. Maybe that waterproofing membrane wasn't as good as what we thought.
That, again, is a very good question. We've had several parking garages, actually, that have had some leakage issues in them, and that's another reason why we're working towards, really eliminating underground parking in such with groundwater that's so shallow. It's an issue, an active issue right now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Stewart?
Thank you so much. There are sometimes presentations at council that you have to bookmark your notes because they have the answers to all of the citizen questions around, and resident questions rather, around especially PFAS and some of these hot topic issues. And we know that water quality and water assurance is so important to the residents. So these are notes I'm going to come back to a lot. So I have a question on the hybrid water system. Do we operate it both ways? So are there periods of time when water from our city wells is maybe going up the hill to grass lawn, or is it mostly water coming in from the Cascade side down into the eastern part of town? Does it go both ways?
That's an excellent question. No, it doesn't. And the reason for that is elevation. So we can take water from Rose Hill down into downtown area. We can't push water back the other direction. So if you think about the way that map kind of looked, that Overlake, Rose Hill, those are all told. Downtown, that can be blended. It's primarily throughout the winter, it's all groundwater, unless we're doing maintenance and taking a well offline and supplementing that in the winter. But for the most part, in answer to your question, no, we can't move it the other direction. We can take water into the downtown area, though.
Okay, thank you. And given that, as you said, you spoke about Overlake, and that's one of the neighborhoods we're going to be adding a lot of density. It was great to hear tonight, 200 development reviews. Is that what you said last year? So we, our friends on the development team, we get to hear from them a lot. We get to work in partnership with a lot. So Chris, I want to thank you for bringing your team out tonight to share in conversation. It was really great to hear from you all and how you're so integrated in that process too. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Well, thank you, council members, for your questions. A lot of my questions were answered here, and really appreciate the presentation and the work that you all are doing. Honestly, in terms of the things that we are accountable to our public to do, one of the very most basic is protecting our water supply and making sure that people have access. So it's been great to hear from you all tonight, as well as the first presentation, and just want to have that appreciation. I had also a quick question following up on some of the ones around the testing. Actually, well, two parts. First is on the ones that we test only every 9 years. Do we have any concerns if something were to happen in those 9 years that we wouldn't know, or do we pick up on if there were to be some sort of contamination or issue around asbestos or herbicides in a particular area? Would we be picking up on those in the interim time with other testing?
Yeah, I'll speak a little bit for Jessica here. Part of the benefit of having a monitoring network is that there are certain things that we're going to find out about ahead of time because of our regular testing in the monitoring network. But there are other things that, unless there is a reason, much like emerging contaminants, you don't know what the concentration or the prevalence is until you do that initial sampling. One of the things that we have to do in our role is constantly keep track of what the most up-to-date testing methods are and what the best practices are for mitigating any risk. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but there are some things that we would have an indication of and some things that we wouldn't.
Yeah, thank you. And then, one topic that's been very kind of coming up for a lot in the community and regionally has been around 6 PPDQ. And I think we were doing a pilot with street sweeping. So curious to hear how that's going and anything that we're learning about that particular contaminant in our water system.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So the 6 PPDQ right now, the big issue is with surface water because it is toxic to coho salmon. And so you're correct. We're doing a pilot study within the Tosh Creek watershed where we're increasing street sweeping and sampling Tosh Creek for 6 PPDQ. Unfortunately, because this is such a cutting edge new chemical, it's taking about 4 to 5 months to get the data back from the lab. So we're pretty far behind in that. But what we can say that we've seen is that we sample both stormwater events when it's raining, so you're getting runoff from the street, and we sample base flow events where it's basically groundwater feeding the creek. 6 PPDQ is much lower when it's just the groundwater. So we can definitely say that the source is coming from the roads, which, that's pretty obvious, but still it's nice to have that piece of data. But we will be coming back to council with that to present once we have the full data set of the results of that.
Great, looking forward to that. And with that, unless there are any other questions, one more from Mr. Stanger.
Thank you. I just wanted to add for the record that Gabby Wolf is our water quality supervisor. In the introductions, I think it was missed, so that you're just not just a person talking about it. You're our water quality supervisor, subject matter expert, but thank you.
Thank you for noting that, and thank you for being here tonight and for the work that you do. Really appreciate it. If there are no other questions or comments, then we will close out this item and say thank you to everyone for covering these really critical topics around our water, both from outside our community and right underneath where we are right now. And I think because we have another meaty item after that, we are going now to take a quick recess for 5 minutes, and we'll resume at 8:39. Thank you. I think we have everyone, so when we're ready, we can resume. Great. Well, welcome back. We are back to our study session of the Redmond City Council on February 13th, 2024. The next item on the agenda is the Redmond 2050 Planning Commission recommendation for housing and overlay. Presenting this item is Carol Helen, Director of Planning and Community Development.
Thank you, Councilmember Kritzer, and good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm glad to be here this evening. Tonight, as part of Redmond 2050, we're here to discuss the Planning Commission's recommendation for housing policies and regulations. Staff have prepared a presentation content that focuses on the questions that you asked during the council member meeting last week. And staff, stakeholders, and planning commissioners have dedicated a significant amount of time to create these recommendations for your review. Before staff presents, I'm going to introduce Sherry Nichols, our Planning Commission Chair, for her to have a few words. Chair Nichols will share her perspective on the deliberations and the recommendation of the Planning Commission. Sherry.
Thank you, Director Helen. Good evening. As I say, this is focused on the housing regulations. What drove our thinking around the housing regulations were the direction from the Housing Action Plan and the housing element, and the direction from the council and from the countywide planning policies of the dire need for affordable housing. What we saw in the data was that one of the largest needs for affordable housing was at the 50% AMI range. So that was what drove our focus to try to push the inclusionary zoning level down to 50% AMI. We think that, of the tools available for affordable housing, inclusionary zoning is appropriate for that level. That's probably as low as we can push it. Things like fee and lieu are more appropriate for lower levels of affordability, such as what we discussed earlier tonight. We did do some work to strengthen the criteria for use for fee and lieu. So we thought that's where the need is greatest. Redmond has already done a lot of work around affordable housing at the 80% AMI level. And so we wanted to extend that. We put in some step-down provisions to try to sort of prime the pump to get some, particularly in the current economy, to try to make it easier for some early adopters, developers, to try to get this started, to let them step down, not have to do the whole thing all at once, but we have an objective of getting to 50%. We discussed MFTE, but MFTE is outside our purview. It's in the municipal code, but we recognize that it's another tool and an important tool for housing affordability. We heard a lot of public input from developers that this is totally infeasible, which I expected. We are asking more from developers, so I expected to hear that they couldn't do it. But we also heard of the tremendous need for it. And the direction that we've heard from the community, from the council, from the county is that this is where we're going. And if we're ever going to get there, the market's not going to get us there. So this is the tool that we thought was the best way to approach. You will notice in your packet that there are a couple of minority reports from other commissioners. We always allow for commissioners who, we don't operate by consensus, we take a vote, and any commissioner that dissents from the vote or wants to expand on the vote can submit a minority report, and so a couple of commissioners did. There is a concern that pushing affordability down to this level will make it impossible for housing to be built. And, that is a risk. None of us have a crystal ball. But we thought that no matter what we did, developers were going to tell us they couldn't build it. So we need this built, and the market's not going to build it for us. So that was the Planning Commission's thinking and approach. And with that, I will hand it over to Ian Lefcourt.
Thank you, Chair Nichols. Hello, my name is Ian Lefcourt, Senior Planner in Long Range Planning, and I am joined by Senior Planner Mike Stenger from ARCH, who is our housing subject matter expert. As a reminder, ARCH is funded by all of the member jurisdictions, so while the organization has a different name, we like to think of them as extended family. We recognize that Council at the previous meeting brought up more topics than what is reflected in just this presentation, but we did find these three major thematic items, and so we focused our presentation on that. If we have time at our follow-up meeting, we can touch on some of the odds and ends, other housing pieces that were brought up. But for tonight, we'll talk about fee in lieu. We'll talk about the process and substance related to the development of our financial models, which informed our policy recommendations, and the rationale for the inclusionary zoning changes to 50% AMI. I will do my best not to repeat what Chair Nichols already provided. The important thing about fee in lieu to remember is that it is one type of alternative compliance. Now, Redmond Zoning Code 2120 requires for most projects of 10 units or more in the city that some amount of affordable housing must be provided. It is a requirement. RZC 2120 also has a component of alternative compliance. And this is an opportunity for flexibility. It's tools in the toolbox for the city. There's an opportunity to provide affordable housing units off-site. That's one option. A second option is fee in lieu payment. And a third option in the existing code is other. Just kind of an opportunity for the city to be open-minded and receive proposals and evaluate them. Now, with the existing code, we have a strong regulatory preference for on-site affordable housing. By that, we mean it's mixed in with the market rate units in the overall development. Now, there's a lot of value there. It provides geographic equity, because it's mixing across the entire city instead of concentrating the low-income households in one area. There's social equity between bringing all these people together. There's amenity equity by giving people opportunities to live closer to transit, healthcare, employment, recreation, all of these pieces. So the code has a strong preference for that on-site, but we do offer those alternative methods. And the fee in lieu has a limited role today and historically. Because of that strong preference, there is a burden of proof on proposals to go with alternative compliance. Our code says that proposals must demonstrate that any alternative achieves a result equal to or better then providing affordable housing on site. One of the reasons why the Planning Commission felt the need to kind of bolster this, to make sure that we added more language emphasizing that priority and adding specifics on how it would be evaluated, is because some of those concerns you see listed there. There's the geographic equity I mentioned, the time value of money. This was a big topic. The moment a dollar is sitting and it's not going to a project, it is losing value. The purchasing power decreases even if the number stays the same. And related to that is that lag in construction of affordable housing. One of the beautiful parts of the mandatory inclusionary zoning is that the affordable units go up with the market rate units. And a nuance of that is the availability of land. It's not just finding an affordable housing effort that we could invest the money into, but it's the siting of it. The city of Redmond is largely built out. There's not a lot of vacant land that we could purchase at reasonable costs. So that availability of land is another reason that lag in construction was a concern for our PC. The recommended amendments, bolstering that preference for on-site affordability. The language very explicitly gets even stronger. It states that fee in lieu requests may only be approved if there is an imminent and viable affordable housing effort. So think of our Together Center. 2 of the 3 fee in lieus we've accepted as a city were developments that had the opportunity to get that money right over to the Together Center. So there was a minimal delay. That third point is a point that our commission really wanted to emphasize as well, is that now the fee in lieu must get better affordable outcomes. It can't just be equal to, it has to be better. And we've measured that as 10% in the code. Some of the factors which we've defined to consider when evaluating the better outcomes are largely drawn upon the exercises we did with Arch for our previous fee in lieu analyses. So it's historically consistent, and we believe it's, in practice, robust. Things include the length of time it takes to produce the affordable units, the location of the units, and nearby amenities. The quantity of affordable units, the affordability levels, satisfying other community needs. So components there would be housing that perhaps is more universally designed, perhaps first floor units that are more accessible, units that perhaps have a greater number of bedrooms to accommodate households with more members, components like that. And then there's also this flexibility for other components as defined by a director. But the overall goal is that our fee in lieu is a tool in the toolbox, but it should be only rarely used in special circumstances. And the financial modeling. We will walk through the collaborative and multi-year modeling. While the efforts began in middle of 2022, the direction for this started well before that with our housing action plan. Action 1.3 explicitly says we're going to focus on this, review it. And it's important to recognize this was not because of any concern with the existing inclusionary zoning. It was regionally recognized, it was working fine. We just wanted to see if there was opportunities to get better outcomes for our community. We had a scope of work that had our Community Attributes, Inc. consultants working on our Housing Action Plan implementation grant efforts to review the inclusionary zoning and our multifamily tax exemption program. Those efforts substantively wrapped up in about June of 2023. At that point, because so much had changed in our economic conditions, the lending rates, the cost of building, our stakeholders, particularly our for-profit developers, requested further engagement to review and revise the model even further. So we continued to work through the summer to keep working at it. We tried to find consensus for, if not the specific numbers, then a consensus that they were reasonable. And we did. Our stakeholders did agree that we eventually got to a point where all of the inputs and outputs were plausible, the numbers themselves. The stakeholders included nonprofit developers, for-profit developers, comparative jurisdictions, other entities like advocacy groups. FutureWise reviewed our model as one example. And then as we moved through that piece, we got to the third quarter of 2023, and that's when these three different prongs all started merging. So we had the CAI work for us. We also had Eco Northwest consulting work focused on the overlake incentives analysis, and we also had BAE consultants working with Arch. All of these different consultants on all of these different analyses had done market data polls. They had done developer interviews. And so we were able to synthesize all of these pieces of information together. And what was the result? Very similar inputs and outputs. That was very useful for our confidence in going forward with these numbers because it showed that there was a triangulation and a high amount of accuracy if all these different methods, numbers, and models created that same outcome. The substance of the models is very similar to what developers would use to analyze potential development opportunities. The two main levers that we used for the CAI work were the quantity of affordable units and the level of affordability for the affordable units. And so the user has the opportunity to input those pieces and see the outcome of what the financial feasibility would be for those scenarios. And we want to emphasize that what to do with those numbers is the purview of the policymakers. We're here to provide those numbers. And so some of the inputs are land value, the type of structure, so that could be things from townhomes all the way up to towers. The geographic area, Overlake has different economic considerations than, say, Education Hill. Some of the outputs are IRR, internal rate of return, yield on cost, and benefit ratio. And we'll discuss those on the next slide. IRR is typically used for relatively short-term holding patterns with a terminal sale. So we think of it as the annual rate of growth that an investment generates over a certain amount of time. So it'd be like if I invested $10 into a lemonade stand, I held it for 33 months, and then I sold it, we would backtrack the average annual, we would average out an annual rate of return for whatever I sold that lemonade stand for. The yield on cost is a metric more focused on the actual performance of the property. It's the rent income, it is the net income generated as a percentage of the total investment cost once the project has stabilized. So that's when it starts, all of the initial costs are paid off, and we can see the full occupancy rates are starting to return. This is one of the main metrics used to analyze rental developments. And then finally, our third output that we looked at is our benefit ratio. And this is a little bit different than the other two. It is a per housing unit measurement of the economic value added to development divided by added economic cost to development. And importantly, this is a very useful tool for examining changes because it compares the change to the status quo. So it helps provide a measure of whether we're giving more to the development relative to how much we're asking from development. And here to discuss that piece more, Mike Stenger.
Thank you. Really happy to be with you. You probably don't need me to repeat this, but I'd like to anyways. Redmond is the leader on the east side in creating affordable housing through land use and tax incentives. You may not know that Arch administers about a little over 2,000 units from these programs, land use and tax incentives, the affordable at or below 80 AMI. And Redmond created 44% of those in the last 30 years. And since 2011, Redmond's created more than all the other Arch member communities combined through those two incentive programs. The way that the city was able to do that was by understanding the value that the city was creating through zoning changes that would increase the value of the land and the value of tax incentives, the MFTE program, and so forth, and determining how much affordability you could get by, in effect, clawing back some of that value for the public benefit. And so that's the that's essentially the analysis that we have been doing for the city. Our staff have been doing for the city for 30 years, and we did again for this time around because, again, with this upzone, you're creating more value for landowners and developers. And the question then that we set out was, if the city's increasing development capacity and abates property taxes, that creates more value. How much additional affordable housing could that value support? So in this kind of conceptual diagram here is meant to show the way that we stack up the values created for the landowner or developer. The yellow part of the bar is from the development capacity. By allowing more units, it's as if the way we measure that value is by taking the value of the land and imagining that the property owner or developer would have to go out and buy that much more land in order to create those units if it weren't being upzoned. The blue bar is the value of the tax exemption over 8 or 12 years. And then the green bar in the middle, or green section, would be value from reducing the cost of parking construction. It could be impact fee waivers. It could be by reducing parking construction, you can build more units in there. But I want to point out that we actually didn't calculate or try to target or capture any of that value. For this analysis, we just used the development capacity and the MFT. And then the bar on the right would be the value of the public, meaning the affordable housing, which is measured by the gap between market rents and affordable rents. In other words, that's the income that the owner forgoes by having those affordable units. So next, please. And this shows 3 of the scenarios that we looked at. So on the left-hand side illustrates the Planning Commission's recommendation. So the value created through the upzoning and so forth eventually increases value to the owner in the amount of $1.50 for every dollar that is captured for affordable housing. That's where we get the ratio of 1.5 to 1. We like to see this ratio be at least 1.2 to 1, so that we feel comfortable that there's some wiggle room there. There's some uncertainty that we can feel confident that the developer is coming out ahead if that ratio is 1.2 or greater. We try not to recommend anything greater than 2.0. So 1.5 is pretty ideal from that standpoint. We tried pushing the percentage for up to 15% at 50 AMI and found that the ratio dropped to 1.1. So that's below our ordinary threshold, and we wouldn't feel as comfortable recommending that. On the other hand, if you did 15% at 60 AMI, you get pretty much the same results as you do for 12.5 at 50. But going back to what our chairwoman said, I think the PC was attracted by the opportunity to get that deeper affordability, and that's where their recommendation landed. I think that pretty well captures my summary.
Thank you. So we'll have more rationale for our IZ changes to 50% AMI specifically. But one of the key components of this is it's not a dream, it's achievable. Everybody who was involved in this, the for-profit developers, the nonprofit developers, city staff, our stakeholders, our community members, everyone wants housing to be built. And our modeling shows that the 50% AMI can work in a supportive market. Critically, when we looked at the new development capacity with all of those benefits and the new proposed 12.5% at 50% AMI, the yield on cost, so remember that metric that is used for evaluating projects or developments, it's about equal to what the status quo yield on cost is for developing an overlake. So the current development capacity with the current IZ requirements is about equal to what the IZ requirements would be under these amendments with the new development capacity. Why is that important? Because whenever the economic conditions of the greater United States improve and are a little bit more favorable to growth, it would come back online about the same time. So whenever the economy gets better, there's be no delay in when the housing would start being constructed again. And one other piece on this slide is that starting in the middle of 2017, Marymore received a substantive update to its regulations. And one piece of that was the MFTE, which has 50% AMI units as part of its option. And we have seen many housing units get developed in Marymore with that MFTE. So we know that it's viable in our city. We received almost 1,000 market rate units and almost 100 affordable units because of that development opportunity. We've touched on King County countywide planning policies a lot, so I won't belabor this slide, but the high level is our housing element directs us to look at 50% AMI. King County CPPs want us to look at 50% AMI. Our Redmond 2050 themes of equity and inclusion guide us to look at 50% AMI. And as Chair Nichols and as Mike both mentioned, 50% is about as deep of affordability as we could go with inclusionary zoning. And this is valuable because inclusionary zoning is a low cost for the city tool to help get those units online. We're using a step-down approach to help with the transition from the current regulations to the proposed 12.5 at 50% AMI. We believe that this will help incentivize first-comers to get in through the gate and get those developments going. We also think that it helps provide a more gentle, graceful transition to this new amount, so it helps developers get used to what's coming. In addition, outside of the amendments in this specific package, the comp plan is exploring opportunities of helping developments that are in the pipeline go forward with the existing regulations that they're under. So we're hoping to smooth this out as much as possible for our developers. What are our reactions? How are we feeling?
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'll open it up to questions from the council. And I'll say thank you, Commissioner Nichols, for joining us tonight, and huge thanks to the whole Planning Commission for the deep work. I know it's been many months, maybe a year, that you've been working on this and taking the public input on it, so it's great to get your recommendations. Councilmember Salahuddin.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation, and thank you so much, Commissioner Nichols, for being here. My question is a little bit around what you mentioned when you spoke earlier, and then throughout the presentation, just looking at, housing is something that we all want, and we want affordable housing across the board. I think it's really important to look at how we get there, and really appreciate the Planning Commission's work to be able to get us, this proposal, and all of the staff as well. I apologize if, during the Planning Commission process, this has definitely been discussed with developers, and seeing, and we received some emails, folks have reached out and said that development might not happen on their side because of, these considerations. Just want to get sort of a rationale on how we got to this value in accordance with thinking that we will be able to move forward with development, and developers will develop, because worst case scenario, we have no housing that's being built. And I want to make sure that we're avoiding that. And so if you have some insight on that, would love to, as the new kid, would love to get some information.
And I'd like to just amplify something that the Chair Nichols said real quickly. And that's some of the things we are focusing on in addition to just the proposals that's before you. So we're recalibrating inclusionary zoning and MFTE. But that's just one of the facets of the proposal. And I know one of the slides in your packet materials talks, it's like slide 20. It was a kind of a resource slide at the end of the slide deck that talks about all the different things that need to happen in order for housing to be developed. One of the things that you discussed at your special meeting earlier this evening was direct assistance. That comes in the form of land and low-income housing tax credits and other things like that. Land use and tax incentives have been very effective over time, and so we're trying to make sure that those are calibrated effectively. We also understand that market rate development also needs to continue. So there's a variety of middle housing options. But to your point of what if development doesn't happen, there are several safety valves in this proposal that are included, one being the step down that was discussed. That one will basically allow for developers that come in after the effective date of the ordinance to take advantage of a gradual step down to the 50% AMI. What that does for us is as units come available under this stepping down provision from 80 to 70 to 60 to 50, is it allows us to track production and to see if production is lagging or if we see warning signs that we can essentially make micro adjustments or bring that back to the council. So with anything we do, there will be a level of adaptation and monitoring attached to it. And then the other thing is we do have many pipeline developments. And there's always uncertainty when you make code changes. I've been in land use for over 30 years. Code changes prompt appeals, they prompt community concerns because design changes and they see a taller building where they didn't think taller buildings could go. That's kind of the cycle of how land use code amendments and zoning code amendments occur. And in order to ameliorate some of that potential impact, there is a vesting provision that allows developments that are currently in the pipeline to remain in the pipeline under the current regulations, which are 80% AMI at 10% at 80% AMI, is so long as they file a building permit before the end of 2026. That's an incredibly generous vesting provision that allows kind of the continuation of development under the existing standards.
And would love to, I just have a follow-up to that one point, but would love to hear from you, Commissioner Nichols. So is there a worry, not the right word, is there a chance that, before the end of 2026, developers will just go forward with all, submitting all of their projects before then, and then we won't have this affordable housing that we're trying to get to under these stipulations? Worry is not the right word. I want housing.
We want housing, so we really want to prompt housing to occur any way that it can, but we do think that that will help the market stabilize because of the interest rate concerns right now. I don't think we'll necessarily see a rush to the permit counter, but I am also not, that opportunity is not completely without merit. So.
Thank you.
I should say from the Planning Commission's point of view, one of the things we kept in mind is this is Redmond 2050, not Redmond 2025. Interest rates change. I mean, interest rates are high right now. When I bought my first house, my first mortgage was at 9%. They don't stay the same. I understand that developers are struggling right now, and there are a lot of, I've learned more about the development process than I ever expected to learn more about what yield on cost is. and how the development process works. And, you know, part of what's going on with their problems with the yield on costs is it's taking longer to get to the permanent loan as opposed to the construction loan because it has to get to 80% and all that. But, you know, there's a lot of moving factors that make it difficult for them right now, and I appreciate that. And I fully expected to hear that they couldn't build. I'm sure that in 1993, when Redmond implemented mandatory inclusionary zoning, they said the same thing. And we've built more affordable housing than any other city on the east side because we're one of the few that have mandatory inclusionary zoning. If we don't ask them, if we don't make them do it, the market's not going to do it for us because we have a $1 trillion company with 50,000 jobs in our city. And so the demand for housing is never going to be met by building. You know, I had a developer tell me, well, you know, the best rent control is a 10% vacancy rate. We can't create a 10% vacancy rate. We could never build enough for a 10% vacancy rate. So.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Other questions? Councilmember Stewart.
I'm getting to the point on these housing ones in particular where I don't have a lot of questions left, and that's a good sign, right? Because we've been, you know, they're pretty baked at this point. And by that, I mean the work has been invested. And Ian, I just wanted to say, hearing you describe how all of those contracts that this body approved every single one of as they were going through, when they all came to coalesce, like hearing that is, and that helped inform a really, as you said, triangulated decision, but to build confidence, that speaks volumes to the recommendations that are baked in. So I really do appreciate that and appreciate where we are at this point. Just to the earlier conversation and very much empathizing with what it's like to be a new council member and to catch up. Earlier tonight, we heard from Director Cochran that we're going to be, you know, continuing to include a financial tool in our next budget, which is that we are going to account for a certain percentage of our sales tax driven by development to be basically ongoing revenue. That speaks to me that these revenues are healthy. And, you know, on that earlier conversation of things are, in the next couple of years, we're expecting to be healthy. So I appreciate also Chair Nichols addressing both the long and the short, you know, and keeping us focused on the long. So I'm running low on questions. I don't have a question, just gratitude tonight on these topics that you covered. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Other questions? Councilmember Nueva Camina.
The gang's all back, and I am so ridiculously proud of not only the staff, the commission, our city. I hear things like Redmond is leading the way in this, and I get to be so proud. I think about how many creative folks that we have that participate in Redmond, whether they work here, they live here, they recreate here. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that we also have a level of, that we have some analytical folks as well, that we're taking a look at numbers, that we're saying, hey, how can this be done? That we remind ourselves that we're not talking about 2025, we're talking about 2050. If we take a look at the market, and I brought this up at commission one time, if we take a look at the market, then we know that it's actually going off of S&P 500. At any point we take a slice, it's growing on average of 9%, even taking into consideration 2 years ago when we had a 22% dip. Then we're going to flip it and we're going to offset it later. So I'm grateful that we're looking at all of these things. And that sustainability is one of our values here in Redmond, that we're striving to have sustainability in all ways, including in our communities. Now, a while back, I had seen some research done out of Chinatown International District, and it was said, and I believe that this was probably 2018 when this research was done, so it is dated, but a dollar would turn over in that community 7 times before it left. Now, I love money. I love talking about money. So I'm thinking, well, if that isn't sustainability, then I don't know what is. And I started looking at, well, how is it that the community is built such that the dollar can turn over like that? Now, I'm also well aware that we have different factors and we can't recreate that. And 7 times is a bit ambitious. But then it has me question, if we are creating a sustainable community such that everyone has a place to belong in Redmond, how many times can a dollar turn over in Redmond? And that really excites me, and I don't think that we have that. But the question that I do have is there some place that we could find out what the cost would be or the savings would be to have a more sustainable community? To where if we have at 50%, we can have, you know, our restaurant workers, our what we've been referring to as workforce. Do we have something to where it would appease our analytical minds, mine as well, to take a look at what would that cost savings be and how sustainable could our economy and community be?
I don't know if I have the research available to answer that right now. I would like to follow up with you on an email to get further precision and make sure I can get an answer for you in advance of the next meeting.
Great. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Angie.
Great. Great question. Thank you. Other questions from the council? Okay, I will then jump in with a few of my questions here. And first of all, just say thank you again. Since we're reminiscing about Planning Commission, I think it was about 6 years ago that we had seen, or maybe more, 7 years ago, we had seen King County had done their initial assessment of the need for housing across King County at different affordability levels. And I remember them coming to the Planning Commission when I was on it with Commissioner Nichols, and they were showing us the amount of below 50% AMI housing that was needed in our area. And I remember asking the question, so our inclusionary zoning is at 80%. How is it that we're going to create that 50%? And so it's great to be able to see that the discussion at that time, you know, led to now many, many years of work of saying, yeah, let's take a look at our inclusionary zoning and especially asking how often do we update this, right? It has been 30 years that we've been at this same level. So I think it's worth us taking a good look. One question that I do have about it is, or I have 2 questions. One is that I've heard as some feedback is that in order to make it pencil out, that developers may have to raise the market rent housing rates up higher. And so I guess I'm curious to hear how the Planning Commission discussed that, as well as what we considered in terms of options to make sure that we don't see kind of all the rest of the units in housing, since we're already seeing rents go up even higher.
Rents are set by the market. They can't raise it above what the market will bear, and they set it at what the market will bear. So if they don't set it what the market will bear, they're leaving money on the table, which they don't like to do. They can't raise it just because they're not making money somewhere else. They can only raise it what the market will bear. And most of the corporate landlords these days are using AI software to set their rents anyway.
I would add to that. I mean, Commissioner Nichols is right. The risk isn't that landlords will raise rent beyond what the market will bear, because they can't. The risk is that they won't do a future deal, right, because they don't think it will pencil. And that's the risk that Carol identified. And Carol also identified all the mitigations that are part of this. So I think that's where to focus the attention is on what's happening with housing production.
Great. Thank you very much. I think that's really helpful. And I know that we all are concerned about making sure that there's the housing production so that we get these units as well, and that also kind of across the boards that we're making sure that we keep affordability in our community. So, and thank you, Commissioner Nichols, for that really helpful point, because I think it's one that's kind of out there in the community. So I just wanted to surface that. The other one is just, I was curious to hear a little bit more. I was reading through some of the materials on how you discuss different options for the thresholds for moving from on the kind of four-step process of the thresholds of doing it by units versus time-bound. Could you speak a little bit more to that discussion, either Commissioner Nichols or planning staff? Since I've gotten some questions about why we don't do more of a year 1, year 2, year 3, et cetera.
I think fundamentally, and Commissioner Nichols, you can add to this, but it was about not wanting to try to time the market. You know, how long is it going to be before a 70% unit is financially feasible? Much better to let the market adjust on its own time. And we don't know what's going to happen to interest rates. We don't know what's going to happen to construction costs. So just make it unit-based.
Great. And you mentioned, Director Helland, that should we get in we should make a change and then we don't see enough housing being produced, we can reevaluate. Can you speak a little bit more to what that looks like?
Well, sure. We have a responsibility under the state and the county requirements to monitor the amount of housing that gets produced. So we do that on an annual basis. And at what levels of, what amount of that is produced at all the various different AMI levels. If we see that housing isn't getting produced at a pace at which we were potentially anticipating, all things being equal, the market is obviously going to affect that. So if we're getting housing under the old regulations for a period of time, that may be enough of a transition to the new regulations. But we do have the option to come in and, for instance, allow more units at a certain level of affordability before we go to the next lower level of affordability. What we can't easily adjust is the target, the location that we're trying to aim at 50%, because, or the percentage, because if we don't do that now, we can't ever get there without another rezone that would provide more benefit. So we have to really set the destination now, but we can adjust if we think that that destination is coming too quickly or is impeding progress so that we can adapt to that.
Great, thank you. Are there other questions from the council? I'm not seeing any. I do have one more. If it's, did you have something to say, Mr. Churchill?
Well, I have a question for the council when the questions are completed, just about where we go from here.
Sounds good. Okay, last question. Since going back to fee in lieu, which was the earlier topic, I did want to cover this just because I have also heard a lot of feedback on this, and just curious. I think it makes a lot of sense, the discussions that you all had, and that we are actually being pretty specific about that. We're trying to incentivize people building the housing within each new housing unit instead of using fee in lieu. But I am curious, because there are other cities that have used fee in lieu to great effect, how, if we evaluated, if they're kind of looking at other cities that have used that model and, any benefits we might be leaving off the table by kind of going the policy direction that we're choosing.
I also got the feedback about, in particular, Seattle using fee in lieu instead of inclusionary zoning. But my understanding is Seattle doesn't even require fee in lieu to actually pay for all of the costs. It's not 100%. I mean, they actually subsidize it. And I couldn't find any evidence that Seattle's fee in lieu program was working any better than, or even as well as, our mandatory inclusionary zoning program. Fee in lieu, I mean, it is a good tool for the very lowest levels of affordability because you can't use inclusionary zoning for that. But, I did some research into it. I couldn't see that it was of superior benefit for, I mean, the developers want it because it removes risks from them. It makes it easier for them and removes risk from them, but I couldn't see any benefit for us as a city for moving away from mandatory inclusionary zoning to total fee in lieu.
Thank you. All right, now Mr. Churchill.
So we have planned to come back to you in 2 weeks and focus that discussion on Overlake and on green building and some of the code rewrite topics that you raised on the 6th at your staff report. But I think it would be helpful for staff just to get confirmation of some kind that, this is basically headed in the right direction, because the next time you see it will be in the form of an ordinance asking you to adopt it or something very much like it. Much later in the year, it would come back to you in October with kind of everything else. If there are other housing questions, so it's part 2 of the question, if we could get those by email, maybe by the end of the holiday weekend, so that we could prepare for the following study session if there are any other housing follow-ups.
Thank you. So council members, keep that in mind. And I will say, I think we have the study session in 2 weeks. And as Mr. Churchill mentioned, we'll be making the decision further out. So, we do have the opportunity, if we don't next study session kind of wrap everything up, or if there's any additional questions, we'll be able to, continue to cover some of this as needed. But everyone hopefully will come prepared for in 2 weeks to have a really robust conversation. Mayor Bernie.
Thanks. I think that the question you asked about inclusionary zoning versus fee in lieu is interesting, and I appreciate Sherry doing her homework, as always. But I would actually love to get a little more detail from the staff on that as well, because we have had some great success with fee in lieu with some very particular projects, and it has given us more units than we would have gotten with the project, thinking of the one across the street. And so I think that having some more data on that would be helpful in helping to determine eventually what the right course of action is. I think, there have been comments this evening about the development community being very aware of this conversation and interested in the outcome. And, I hope that they reach out even, more robustly, if that's possible, and ensure that we have really good data and information from all sources as well, from our affordable housing providers. Thank you, Arch, for being here tonight, to ensure that we're really, having the full discussion. I know Planning Commission has worked extremely hard on this, but I want to make sure that as things kind of come to this body, we're also having some of those discussions as well. So that's just a suggestion in your work, since we are going to 2050 with this.
Yep. Thank you very much. So with that, we'll say thank you to the staff, and we'll move on to the next item. And thank you so much, Commissioner Nichols, and thank you also for being here today. Really appreciate having your input.
Thank you, council members.
Thank you.
Great. The next item on the agenda is council talk time. So a couple pieces of items, as requested by some council members, did want to highlight a couple of the upcoming things that will be on our next business meeting agenda. We'll have approval of a couple of different contracts that we saw come through committee, including our and approval of some of the final acceptance of projects like our flashing beacon crosswalks project and our Redmond Way ELSP 180th Avenue Northeast intersection, as well as the wastewater pump station 13 replacement project, which is a $9 million contract. So some big contracts coming through. And some in the appointments to Cascade Water Alliance per tonight's discussion on that topic, and then also we will also have finally, after having seen this, have it come off and then come back on due to some differences at the State Building Code Council, that we will be making some changes to our building code around electrical code and around energy, as well as the wildland urban interface and plumbing codes as well. So something to look out for there. And also, and then we also have, Oh, I see, yes. And then we have also Planning Commission recommendation, Phase 2 amendments to the Redmond zoning and municipal codes, which was an item that the council previously had a study session on and said, let's move that item to consent, separate from the one that we have today that we were just discussing. So that's one piece of the work that will be moving forward. And then we will also have on new business a vote on the Redmond Senior and Community Center budget increase to of $3.7 million to make a total project budget of $61,700,000 for that wonderful project that we're all excited to be able to cut the ribbon on soon. So that's going to be on new business per council request. So just want to flag that those are coming up for the business meeting next week. And then also I sent out the extended agenda so that you all can see what's on there as well. And speaking of the Redmond Senior and Community Center, just wanted to note for everyone that the date has been set for the opening on Friday, May 3rd at 1 p.m. And then there'll be a festival the next day to follow. So mark your calendars, save the date. We'll be getting out more information, but I know that the council's really excited about that and we're looking forward to it. In terms of upcoming council events that I just wanted to remind everyone, I sent you an email, but I'll flag it also in public that we have upcoming in 2 weeks from now, approximately. Our council retreat will be happening here at City Hall, and the public is invited to come and watch us have our retreat if they like to, but it will be a time for us to talk about how we work together and some of our priorities for the year and some things we want to work on together. That's on February 24th. That's a Saturday here at City Hall in the Alpha Bravo room. And then the other kind of key piece that I would note for council members is that we are also going to be following up doing our retreat with Anita Page at the end of April to be able to follow up on our respect, equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism work. And we're going to use a fifth Tuesday to be able to do some of that work and do some retreats. So you'll be seeing something come out for that on that soon. And then last item that I'll put out there is I want to say thanks to the council members that were able to attend the Association of Washington City Action Days. I know that I got a lot out of the conference, being able to talk with council members from cities all across the state and be able to do some engagement with our legislators. Over the last 2 weeks, we've had quite a few different engagements with them and been able to reiterate some of the City of Redmond's key asks. But I wanted to open the floor. I know we have 2 council members here today that attended, and I think Council Vice President Forsyth had to hop off, but if any of the council members here wanted to share, would love to open up the floor to see if you have anything you want to share with our fellow council members who weren't able to attend of just takeaways from the conference. Councilmember Salahuddin.
Yep, thank you. And I'll be brief. You can ask me questions after. But I think the biggest takeaway was just the level of challenges and issues that the cities around the state are facing, and they're, it seems like a lot of them are unique. Some regarding ferries, some regarding, specifically roundabouts, things that are, within communities that we might not have access to in Redmond, but I think the overarching theme was that there needs to be a lot more advocacy at the state level. And, a few folks from Redmond, both, Council President Kritzer and Mayor Burney both stood up and shared with the community and got a lot of positive reception around the work that Redmond specifically is doing towards our legislative asks, towards what we're doing as a city. And I think that that's really telling to, show Redmond as a leader across the state in a lot of the work that we're doing. So that was a big takeaway. I think a lot of cities are looking at us to mimic some of our success, whether or not it's relevant.
Councilmember Nueva Camina.
What I love about conferences like this is that it brings us all together, and referencing as Councilmember Salahuddin had said about the ferries, and that even though it may not seem related, it actually impacts folks in Eastern Washington for agriculture. So what seems like it's not related because we are within the same state and we are interdependent upon each other. And sometimes it's easy for us to forget that. So conferences like this are so important to bring us together so that we can have this dialogue and share what the concerns are so that we can see, no, actually, we're pretty connected.
Thank you. Great thoughts. And Mayor Bernie, you were there as well. Do you have any thoughts as well?
Well, I thank the council members who are able to attend. I think it's always a good opportunity. I'm so glad our newest members got a little bit of something out of it. The opportunity to connect with cities around the state is, I think, vitally important to really understand some of their different perspectives. I was able to sit with council members from Tacoma, council members from Richfield, council members from, Eastern Washington, Medellin Falls, and keep running into the mayor from there. She shows up to most of the AWC things, but, really hearing about their challenges and many differences, but also many similarities. And one of the other, I think, exciting things about AWC is that it's nonpartisan. And so we really just talk about city issues. And I just think that's a fantastic opportunity to learn and grow. So thanks for coming. Thanks for going. I think our community is better because we get these opportunities to kind of stretch and learn more about what else is happening in the state and what we can bring back to the city of Redmond.
Yeah, and I will echo on that. I think one of the things that strikes me the most of just a theme that we're dealing with here in Redmond, and sometimes it feels like because we're, as our new tagline for Redmond 2050, as we're going from suburb to city, is that growth is really on the mind. But I think what's interesting when you get with all these different cities, some of which have 300 people, and then some of which have, hundreds of thousands of people, is that everyone is dealing with growth. Even the ones that have only 500 people, that they are also trying to figure out how to manage this. And so it is really interesting to be in conversations around this and around specifically housing and how we're all very interconnected. And I will note that the governor spoke to all of the cities and emphasized in particular during his speech how important it is for cities to step up and help to in particular address the need for low-income housing, and that really at the state level, folks are watching what we do in the cities. So it means a lot for us in Redmond to be doing what we're doing, and it made me really proud to know that we're a city that's helping to lead on that. Yeah, with that, I don't have any other items, but I will ask council members, do you have any other items or questions? Councilmember Stewart.
Couple of items, thanks. Just on the next business meeting, Council President Kritzer mentioned the new business item around the senior center. I spoke with Director Cochran and confirmed that council will be receiving the follow-up information that we requested on the real estate excise tax revenues and how that's all looking. It's actually going to be in your council packet for next week. So not in a separate email, but that's great, because then the public can see it as well. So it'll be in there. Look for that. Thanks for sharing what you all heard in Olympia. I was not able to attend and get away from work, but I was able to, since I was in town, to attend the event we heard about for last Thursday night, which was the Bellwether Housing Open House in Overlake. So this is the project going in the Overlake TOD, right next to the Overlake Village Light Rail Station. So they reviewed the project. It's obviously something that staff are still working through the process on, so I won't speak too much out of turn, but was nice to make contact there. And then I had a question around, thanks for mentioning the retreat next weekend. The question, as I wrote it, was, what does it look like to be prepared for next weekend? Because it's actually, you said it's nearly 2 weeks away, but it's next weekend, so it's coming up quick.
Yeah, well, Council Vice President Forsyth and I were able to meet with our facilitator, who, as I mentioned, is the executive director of MRSC. So I think we'll bring some really good ideas. And we had a really great brainstorm with her around kind of what the needs are, what we've heard from council members in terms of discussion topics. And she was going to kind of take that back and let us know some ideas of how we might organize it based on some of her expertise. So we're waiting back for that. But as soon as I get it, I'll send out the the agenda to all of you in advance, so that way you can know what we're going to cover. And there'll be a little bit of pre-work of a couple questions for you to think about, and potentially a form just to send in a couple of your top priorities, so we can kind of pre-collate that list, and be able to even share that out so you can think on it. You don't have to see it for the first time during the retreat.
Okay, so that sounds like it'll be
Soon,
and then soon for a response. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And one of your comments reminded me, one other comment that I did want to note, based on something that's been a priority for council, that we did advocate for in some of our meetings over the last couple weeks, and we had a breakfast with our legislators while we were in Olympia last week, was just really making sure that we talked to our key legislators about the RERAP Act, which has been a big priority for council. And I know that there was some movement on that in the last week, so we really tried to emphasize the importance of that, as well as some of our other city asks. So just wanted to highlight that we did attempt to support that ask.
Apologies, I thought you were asking for more action, so. Thank you.
No, it was just to note that I know this has been a big city priority, and I just wanted to highlight how we did make our best effort to be able to get all of our legislators on board for that. Any other comments, questions? All right. Well, if there are no other items for the council, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.